President, please be seated. The court is back in session and the floor is given to the co-prosecutor to resume his line of questioning. You may now proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Witness, we were talking about the events that took place in Tria Village. And I want to go to the time where you were brought with a group of at least 40 other men to a house by the river. When you and the 40 men were taken to this house, how many Khmer Rouge soldiers or cadres were at that house with you?
Answer. I did not count them at the time. There were many of them below the house. We were sleeping on the house and there were Khmer Rouge soldiers below the house. There were at the time many houses and I did not know at the time where Cham people were from. There were about 20 houses.
I want to talk about when you first arrived at the house, when you were first brought there. Were the Khmer Rouge soldiers that were there, did they have guns?
Answer. They were all armed. For instance, if there were 100 of them, all of them were armed.
And was it when you were taken to that house that you and the other men, the other 40 men, were asked whether you were Cham or Khmer?
Answer. They asked us after they tied all of us up, and we were beaten at that time until they were satisfied with their acts. And it was at 7 p.m. that we were told to climb up onto the house. Doors and windows were locked, and they were sleeping in the hammocks below the house. There were around 10 of them guarding all of us.
When you were tied up and asked whether you were Cham or Khmer, who was it that was asking you this question?
Answer. They were military men and they pointed their guns at our necks, so whether we were Khmer or Cham people. Some of us mistakenly said that we were Khmer at the time, and they kicked us and we fell to the ground. After that, they grabbed our hairs and beat us and kicked us again.
Did they ask you any questions other than whether you were Cham or Khmer?
Answer: there were no other questions. And after we were asked, we were put into that house. Everyone was tied up in that house.
And when you were taken to this house, did you see people who were being held in other houses next to yours?
Answer: yes. I peeped through the window. I could see them because the houses were close and adjacent to each other. Cham people were full in those houses.
How did you know that the people who were in the houses next to you were also Cham?
Answer: because we talked to one another that you also came to the houses, so they were all Cham.
Did you recognize any of the other people, the other Cham people who you saw in other houses?
Answer: I did not know where those Cham people were arrested from. However, all I know is that these Cham people were collected from different villages, and Cham people were put in the Krochma districts, and some of them were further taken to Tria village.
You said that you were locked in this house and that the guards and people around you went to sleep. I want to go now to the next morning. Can you tell the court what happened to the Cham people who were being detained in these houses the next morning when you got up?
Answer: nothing happened the next morning. We were in that house for 1 day and 1 night, and the militiaman told us that we would be given porridge to eat, and we were waiting until the evening, and in the evening there was no porridge for us, and the militiaman lied to us once again that the porridge would come in soon. At that time, frankly, we had no water to drink and also no meal to eat.
I want to make sure I understand correctly. Are you saying that after you had arrived in Cham village, in Tria village, that you spent the next day locked up in that house without receiving any food, but nothing other than that happened that first day? Is that correct?
Answer: no, we did not have anything to eat and drink. And the day after, we were still tied up, and we were taken to the river front. At that time, I untied the rope, and I fled the house at the back door. During that night, during the second night, there were no soldiers below the house, and during that time that I could flee the house through the back door.
I'll ask you, I'll come back to what happened to your group and what happened to you when you were taken out that night. Before you were taken out of the house that night, did you see what was happening to the other Cham people who had been gathered in Tria village?
Answer: they were taken to the river front. I noticed that there was a big pit at the river front. Jam people, were taken out of all houses and placed at the riverfront.
And what happened to the people when they were taken out of the houses and brought to the riverfront?
Witness, I'm sorry, could you repeat your question? Could you say it again?
Yes, my question is what was done to the people who were brought out to the riverfront?
Answer: soldiers came to take all of them out to the riverfront. 30 of them, and one soldier was responsible for one Jam person. All Jam people were taken out to the big grave or pit. I saw the iron bar with the size of my lower arm located at the pit or grave.
Did you see people being taken into the river?
Answer: after I could manage to flee the house, I I was staying secretly close to the route where the soldiers were taking the Jam peoples to the river front. It was lucky for me at the time that the soldiers did not notice my presence at that place.
And what is it that you saw the soldiers doing with the people in the river?
Answer. No screaming, no crying. It was quiet. And after Cham people in one house had been collected by those soldiers, the soldiers would go to take Cham people at from another house, and they did this until all people left those houses. I was secretly staying in the bushes, the morning glory bushes, and I watched the incident until they completed uh, the killing.
Mr. Witness, did you see the soldiers, the Khmer Rouge soldiers, killing the people who were taken out of the houses? And if so, can you tell the court how they were killing the people who were taken out of the houses?
Answer. I saw very clearly that Cham people were being walked away to the river. There they blindfolded Cham people and they tied up Cham people. And after Cham people reached the river, they were told to board the motorboat, and they drove those Cham people to the river and sink the boat into the river. They did this until they completely collected all Cham people from houses. At night time, I could not see what happened at that place.
Mr. Witness, I want to read to you an excerpt from the interview you gave to Isa Osman. This is E3/9334, E3/9334, Khmer 00204 436 through 437, English 00204 442 through 43, and French 00274 724 through 25. This is what you said in that interview, quote, at about 7 o'clock, and you were talking about the morning in this passage, I saw 5 or 6 Khmer Rouge cadres go up into a house nearby. They dragged out the prisoners, each tied up and blindfolded. I stared, watching them. Then I saw them walk the prisoners one by one to the riverbank. A boat was anchored there, and there were about 30 prisoners waiting nearby. They undressed the prisoners down to their shorts and put them in a line. All of the prisoners were men. They took a rope from the boat and ran it through the bonds of each prisoner from one to the next. One end was tied to the last prisoner in line, and then they tied the other end to the stern of the boat. Then they took off the blindfolds. I was completely terrified as I watched the men, some crying, some screaming, as they fell to the ground and rolled as the boat pulled away toward the middle of the river. At midstream, one Khmer Rouge loosened the end of the rope that was tied to the boat. Then the boat turned back to shore to repeat the process. We began to whisper to one another as we watched this. We knew our fates would be the same. The boat kept repeating this over and over throughout the entire day. End of quote. I have a number of things I want to ask you. The first thing I want to clarify with you, Mr. Witness, did you see people being dragged and drowned into the river while you were still in the house in which you were being detained? Or did you only see that at nighttime after you had escaped from the house?
Answer. Yes, that that is what I saw during the daytime. They Jam people were undressed to their shorts. They were dragged out of the houses, blindfolded and tied up. This incident repeated until they completed their task. I did not know where Jam people were transferred from. During that incident, I saw what happened. I was crying together with other Jam people, and I could manage to flee the house one day. There were piles of clothes, and Jam people were undressed to their shorts, and those remaining clothes were collected back, and they were given to all of us.
The house in which you were being detained, how far was it from the river?
It was about 50 meters away from the river bank. I could see what happened very clearly. My house was adjacent to another house, and I could see the river and the boats very clearly from my house. I could look through the crack of the wall.
Could you describe for us what this house was like in which you were detained and from which you saw what was going on at the riverfront? What kind of house was it? Can you describe?
Answer. It was an old house, 11 meters long and 6 meters wide, the house where I was detained.
Was it a traditional country house that had stilts or piles so that the house was elevated off the ground?
It was a traditional house. It was elevated up from the ground. It was a steel house, but it was not high from the ground. We could reach the floor of the house with our arms reaching to that floor.
And you stated that you saw the boat that was dragging and drowning people in the river, repeating this throughout the day. Can you tell us how many times you saw a boat take people out and drown them in the river?
Answer. It happened from the morning until the evening. It started from 7 a.m. in the morning until the evening. I did not know how many trips they came to collect Jam people. It happened repeatedly from the morning until the evening, from 7 until the evening. I was sitting in the house watching what was happening. I was crying, I was weeping, and I was thinking that my fate would be in the same way. They were walking past my house, and I could see Saint was walking past my house at that time.
Could you tell us now how it was that you managed to escape from your house?
Answer. I fled from the house and hid myself in the bush. I was crawling toward the river. I was crawling, and I was terrified at that time. When I reached the mosque, when I reached the river front, I could see there were piles of clothes. At that time, I had a water container, and I sank that container in the river so that the water would go into that container. And I swam across the river to Prachi.
I want to go back to the time that you were able to escape from the house before you went to the river and swam down the river. How was it that you were able to get out of the house in which you were being detained without the soldiers seeing you? Can you tell us how that happened?
Answer. At that time, they were tying up the Jam people. The house was 11 meter long, and while they were tying up the Jam people, I fled the house from the back door. They did not know at that time. During that night, it had a heavy rain, and the sky was really dark, and even with the lantern, they could not see that I was escaping.
Did you leave the house through a door, or did you leave the house through a plank on the floor?
In fact, I plied a plank opened. It was loose and it was just big enough for my body physically to get out of the house. Nobody was aware that I could go through that hole after I removed the plank. And actually, in France, the soldiers were tightening up the knots on those people.
Do I understand correctly then that you escaped through that plank at the time that the other people in your house were being taken away? Is that correct?
Yes, they took everyone out, but in fact, about half of the people were already been taken out. When I could loosen the tie, then I plied the plank open, and I could escape. About 10 of the people on the house had been taken away already, and about 10 more remaining on the house.
And you said that when you got out of the house and went down to the river, you saw a pile of clothes. Where is it exactly that you saw this clothes, and can you describe for us what the size of this pile of clothes was?
Actually, it was so dark during the night, I could not see the big pile. However, I could feel it, and I knew it was a pile of clothes of those people who were taken out from the village. People were stripped of their clothes near the waterfront, and there was a pile of it. And I did not know what happened to the owners of those clothes, as I only saw the clothes and not the people.
This pile of clothes that was by the river, how high was it? Do you remember how high the pile was?
Actually, the pile was about 2 meters wide, and the height was about half a meter, or it could be up to my waist.
You've told us that you went into the river to escape from Tria. Where did you end up after you swam away in the river?
I actually reached the other side of the riverbank at Prachi. Actually, I still had a cousin living in Prachi. And then I went to the house of my cousin, and it was not yet at dawn, but I was so hungry, so actually I ate a raw corn from the plantation. By that time, I had not had anything to eat for 2 days.
I want to wrap up my questions so my colleagues have some time to ask you a few questions. Before I complete my questions, you talk about in your interviews of how after you survived the killings at Tria Village, at the end of the Khmer Rouge period, you returned back to Ampel Village. When you came back to Ampel Village at the end of the Khmer Rouge regime, did you ever see again any of the Cham people who had been taken with you to Tria Village that day?
I actually went to Tree village by myself. Nobody was taken me there. And in fact, I arrived in Ampel village by nightfall, and I hid myself in the house of my elder sibling, and nobody knew that I was there at the house. And my elder sibling shared me the gruel, and we kept it very quiet because I was afraid that I would be recaptured and sent back.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. I was asking you about after the Khmer Rouge had been driven out of power. But my question is, did you ever see again any of the Cham people who had gone with you to Tria Village and been detained in the houses there? Did you ever see any of those people again after the Khmer Rouge regime was over?
No, I did not. And I did not recognize the new faces.
The last question I'd like to ask you before I turn it over to my colleagues, your family members, how many of your family members died during the Khmer Rouge regime, and who was it? Who from your family died during that period?
In my family, I lost two of my elder siblings. That is my elder two brothers. And in fact, in my family, there were only three boys, including myself, but my two other siblings had been killed during the regime.
You've already told us that you never saw your wife and your youngest son again after they had been taken with you to Tria Village. What about your other child? You mentioned that you had two children at the start of the Khmer Rouge period. What happened to your other child?
I never saw my wife again, and I conclude that my wife and my child who was with her died.
ខាងប្រព័ន្ធដឹងគេយកទៅ
However, However, I did not know how they died. It was possible that they were taken away and killed, or they were drowned as it was taken at night time.
Thank you for answering my questions, Mr. Witness. Okay. My colleague has some questions for you. Thank you for your time today.
National Deputy Co-Prosecutor, good afternoon, Mr. President, Your Honors, and everyone. In the interest of time, I only have 3 or 4 more questions supplementary to what has been asked to the witness. President interrupts. You need to consult with the lead co-lawyers for the remaining time, as we only have about less than 20 minutes left for the allotted time to the 2 teams. Mr. President, I think the time is manageable. Tribunal only needs about 10 minutes to put questions to the witness, and the co-prosecutor can use the remaining time. President, you may proceed. Deputy Co-Prosecutor, I have about 5 minutes, so let me go straight into my questions. Mr. Witness, you said you lived for a period of time in Prechi village. Did you ever see any Cham person who was forced to get married while you were living there? Answer, no, I did not. Question. Let me go back to the time of the arrival of the Southwest cadres. Among the new people, you were allowed to return to your home village of Ampel, and that you stayed there briefly, and then the commune chief instructed you as well as the newcomers to relocate to Trier village. Can you tell the court how many newcomers who were instructed to go and resettled in Trier village with you? Answer. There were about 20 families from Ampel village and another 20 families from Soy village, and we were all sent together to Trier village. Question. When you were instructed to go and resettle in Trier village amongst other Cham people, did you make any request to the commune chief or the cadre in charge? President, Mr. Witness, please observe the microphone. Answer. It was Kamrat Singh who told us that the next day the newcomers had to be returned to Trier village, and that we had to organize ourselves to start the journey the next day. We were not allowed to stay in Ampel village any longer, and if we were to stay, they would deprive us of gruel. Question. And did you present any request? Answer. Yes, I did. I said that I didn't want to go there, but I had no choice. I knew that I would be killed when we arrived in Trier village, But there was also no point staying behind because our food and gruel would be deprived. There was no alternative for us but to go. Question. So you knew beforehand that you would be killed when you arrived in Trier village. Am I correct? Answer. Yes, I did because a group had been sent there before us. They were told to go there to build houses, but they never returned. And then their families were sent after and they disappeared too. For that reason, I didn't want to go, but I could not stay behind because the food would be deprived. Question. And while en route to Trier village, you said that 20 families were traveling together with you. Was it 20 families or 40 families? That is, the families from another village? Answer. It was a mixed collection, a mixed gathering from Ampel village and from Soi village. And I could say maybe there were about 40 families together from these two villages. I saw many men while I was being sent there. Question. And while you were en route, did you observe any security guards patrolling along the road? Answer. No, there was no guard. We were asked to make our journey by ourselves, and it was Comrade Singh who traveled up and down, monitoring us leaving the village. That is, leaving on Pearl to Trier village. He was on his motorbike observing the procession that we made. Question. Was Comrade Singh armed with any kind of a weapon? Mr. President interrupt. Mr. Witness, please observe the microphone. Witness. I did not see any weapon that he had. However, if he had a weapon under his shirt, I would not notice. But people believed that he believed in superstition and magic. Question. If there were no guards and you knew that there were about 40 families traveling with you together, and you knew beforehand that you would be killed when you arrived in Trier village, why didn't you decide to flee to other villages, namely to Eprayachi village? Answer. When we almost arrived at the Trier village, we didn't want to go as we saw many soldiers at the Trier village, and it was too late to return our ox cart. And we didn't know where to go. If we were to go to the forest with the ox cart, we could not make it. And by that time, some women wept and cried, as it was too late to return or to go back. Because by that time we reached the point of no return, and we were told that people were being tied up and sent away every day. Question. You said you stopped about half an hour before you entered the Trier village, am I correct? Answer. Yes, we stopped for about half an hour and we did not know what to do. We allowed the cows to rest as well, and the women started crying. However, men still stayed on the ox cart. We did not know what to do. We knew that we would be taken and killed when we entered the village, but if we return or we go back, it's too late. Question. I'm running out of time, Mr. President. Thank you, and I'd like to cede the floor to the lead co-lawyers. Tisrina, thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon, Mr. President, Your Honors, and everyone. And good afternoon, Mr. Utsay. My name is Tisrina. I'm a lawyer for civil parties. I have some questions to put to you. Let me go back a little bit to the time when you, the Cham people, were living in Prek Achi village. And later on, you spent 2 weeks living in Ampel village. These are the two main focus of my questions. Can you tell the court the living condition and the food ration for you while you were living in these two respective villages? Answer. Before that, my elder sibling actually went to collect gruel, and then we distributed the gruel among us. Later on, my sibling had dysentery while going to collect the gruel and could not reach the location. Counsel interrupts. Mr. Witness, allow me to rephrase my question. My question is in relation to the living condition of the Cham people as well as the food ration given to the Cham people. What was the living condition like? And what was the food like? Was it abandoned? Was the living condition difficult while you were living in Prek Achi village? And so the situation was extremely difficult. 3 kilos of rice was given to people living in a house. We could not cook any rice, but we instead cooked gruel. We never had any luxury of having any cooked rice from year on end. Question. And you were a Cham Muslim person. Did they respect you in giving you food? I mean, that they did not give you pork to eat? Or what was the condition like? Answer. The food was prepared, mixed together. For example, pork meat was mixed while they were preparing food, and it was given to us, the Cham people. We were forced to eat. However, some of us refused to eat, and we were giving some grains of salt instead. Question. You said some of you were forced to eat pork. What kind of effect did it have on mentally on the Cham people while they were eating pork? Answer. Of course, it did have an impact upon us, but what could we do? Some of us had to eat, and they threw up after, and they begged for grains of salt instead of pork. And sometimes we had to hide the salt so that we could eat it during our meal time instead of having pork soup. Question. So, according to your religion, the Cham people do not eat meat, and what happened to the Cham people who were forced to eat the meat, because that would be contradictory to the disciplines in your religion? Answer: we worship the holy text of Quran, and Allah prohibited us not to eat any dog meat or pork under any circumstances. These are the true meats that we are prohibited from eating. Question: does the Holy Quran provide any explanation for the prohibition or consumption of dog meat and pork? Answer: in the Holy Quran, Allah prohibits us from consuming dog meat and pork. As for the rest of the meat, we have a choice to eat. That's all I know. Question: you have stated about Samjang. Can you provide an explanation to what it meant to the court? Answer: in the Holy Quran, Allah mentions Samjang, and we worshipped the Holy Quran. Every Muslim has to worship the holy text, and it means that we prayed by worshipping the Holy Quran. Question: do all the Cham people have to engage in the practice of Samjang, that is pray in English? Does Samjang represent a symbolic practice of prayer, of adherence to the Holy Quran by all Muslims? Answer: not every Muslim person practices prayer through the Holy Quran, but for ordinary Muslim, we all have to practice Samjang or to pray. Question: I'd like to put a few more questions in relation to your time at Tree Village. What kinds of people were sent to Tree Village? Were you considered making mistakes so that you were sent to a Tree Village? Answer: no, we did not commit any mistake. We were simply villagers. However, after we returned from Prechi village to our village, then we were instructed to go to Tree Village. And it was Sain, who was a Southwest cadre, who told us that the area had been liberated and that we could return to our home village. But it was the policy of resending it further to Tree Village, as the area had been liberated and the country enjoyed peace. So we were sent to Tree Village. Question: and when you arrived in Tree Village, you said that you were questions and pure Cham people were put in one group, and the half Cham, half Khmer were placed in another group. Were you questions on other issues besides on your ethnicity? Answer, no, because those who were sent there were all Cham. There were no Khmer people. However, maybe they tested us by asking us those questions whether we were half Khmer or half Cham. However, they knew that we were all pure Cham people. However, we were afraid that they would beat us if we said that we were Cham. So some of us told them that they were Khmer, and it became even worse as they even beat us more. Question. Later on, you fled from Trier village and you survived. Have you ever returned to Trier village after the fall of the Khmer Rule regime? If that is the case, and as you said, you saw a big pit in Trier village during the Khmer Rule regime, and if you returned to Trier village after the fall of the Khmer Rule regime, have you observed whether there was only one single pit or there were many more pits? Answer, no, I have not returned to the Trier village. And from what people said, we all know there was only one large pit there with many iron bars scattered nearby, but personally I never returned again. Question. Were you aware of the killing of the Cham women? Answer. The wives were killed separately, the single unmarried ladies were killed separately, the husbands were killed separately. They killed the Cham people in these three different separate groups. Question. Have you heard about an event where Cham women was asked to lie down on a plank facing down, and then later on her throat was slashed and thrown into the pit? Answer, I saw it, rather I heard it. I heard the sound of the killing of those people, but I did not witness it. Council, in the interest of time, I thank you very much for your response, and Mr. President, I'm grateful for the opportunity. President, the Chamber will adjourn now and resume tomorrow, that is Tuesday, 8 September 2015, commencing from 9 o'clock in the morning, where we will continue to hear testimony of witness at saying, and commence hearing testimony of a civil party, that is through TCCP 244. Mr. Athain, the Chamber is grateful of your time to testify before this Chamber. However, it is not yet concluded, and you are invited to return to resume your testimony tomorrow, starting from 9 o'clock in the morning. Court officer, in collaboration with WESU, please make arrangement for this witness as well as the reserved civil party to TCCP 244 to the place where they stayed, and invite them to return to the courtroom tomorrow. Security personnel, you are instructed to take the two accused, Sampon and Nunchi, back to the detention facility and have them return to attend the proceedings tomorrow before 9 o'clock in the morning. The court is now adjourned.